Hello and welcome to a brand new Arseblog Arsecast right here on arseblog.com. How are you? Hope you're well. Thank you very much indeed, as always, for being here. The dust has pretty much settled on season 2024-25. What lies ahead is a summer full of transfer news and rumours and speculation and players being linked with Arsenal from all kinds of sources of varying degrees of accuracy and believability. I'm not sure, because of the way that platform has gone these days, the role of the Twitter ITK is quite what it was. But it doesn't mean there isn't going to be a load of players and a load of stories and a load of spurious nonsense that we have to kind of find our way through to the nuggets, the little pearls of truth and wisdom that will be out there this summer. So it's all to look forward to, which is why in this particular episode, we're looking back, but in a very specific format. One of the most popular things we do on Arseblog and Arseblog News are the post-game player ratings. People love to come along and leave their own ratings. We have a system which allows people to do that. You can leave your rating, but then they can give out to me because they thought, well, you've been too high or too low or too harsh or too kind. I'm always getting given out to, but that's okay. I'm a big boy. I can deal with that. But it is a very popular feature that we have on the site. So I thought what we would do today is rate the players from season 2024-25 from back to front. And if you check in the show notes right now, you will find a link to a post on Arseblog News where you can go, you can leave your own ratings on the players. You can leave some comments underneath as well if you would like. But what we'll get is a consensus from all the people who vote. It gives an average vote. And I guess it'll be quite interesting to see how the sort of wider public vote tallies with the opinions and the ratings that we're about to give right now. So check your show notes. You'll find the link to the post in there. And with me on this particular episode to do the number crunching, to rate the players all the way through is Lewis Ambrose. Hello, Lewis. Hello,
Andrew. I can't wait for all of us to be on the exact same page when it comes to how good each player was.
Of course. It is one of those things that gets people a bit wound up, you know, when I do the player ratings on Arseblog News after a game when someone goes, how could you give him 7.5? There's no way. He should have been 5 or 9. You know, there's no sort of telling exactly. It is one of those things that just, I don't know if it gets under people's skin, but they have very strong opinions about the made up numbers based on a player's performance. But it's a bit of fun as well at the same time. So to kind of set the scene, we're going to go through the squad from back to front. And this is just my way of doing things. So this is how we're going to do it. There's no right way. There's no wrong way. This is just my way. So my starting point for a player rating, doing from 1 to 10, is to start with a 6. So if a player is a bit better than 6, if they have a decent game, obviously they get a higher mark. If they're below average, they get a lower mark. The other thing I would stress is that the ratings are individual, right? For each player as an individual. Not, let's say, I give one player 8 out of 10, and then you say, well, how can you give him 8 out of 10 and you only gave him 7.5 out of 10, right? It's not a comparison of each player against each other. It is us rating the players based on A, how we feel they've performed over the course of the season, and B, what we sort of expected from them, right?
Yeah. Right.
So it's based on what we expect from a player and how they've actually performed, and then we make up a number that seems right for that player on his own, rather than, well, if this guy gets this, then this guy has to get that. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, that was one of the things I was going to ask, right? Like, there's obviously, you kind of expect Thierry Henry to be 10 out of 10. So I guess it's harder maybe for Thierry Henry to really impress you and blow you away compared to, you know, Jeremy Aliadier comes in for a few games and, you know, it takes less for him to blow your socks off and
Sure.
be like, oh my God, he was brilliant. I didn't expect that, I guess.
Exactly. And we've maybe got a few of those players to discuss in this particular episode. So without further ado, let's get on with it. And we should start with the goalkeeper and start with David Raya, who has had a share of the Golden Glove this season with Matt Sells for the second year in a row. He is the Golden Glove winner, or at least a part of the Golden Glove winning team or group of players. So I'll let you go first. We'll maybe take it in turns to go first on players and give our first rating without wanting to influence you or anything like that. What did you give David Raya out of 10?
I'm going to give David Raya an 8 out of 10. I think David Raya has a shout for Arsenal Player of the Season this season, and I think if you go all the way back to August and the start of the season, and we kicked off with that. There was a great save against Wolves. There was that incredible double save against Villa at Villa Park, and the penalty save and save from the rebound against Atalanta as well in the Champions League, our first Champions League game of the season. And I think, to be honest, that sort of set the tone for David Raya's season. Mm-hmm. Without this Ramsdale discussion going on anymore. I think it was finally everybody knew who the Arsenal number one was. There was no debate over whether he should be or whether a few bad games and maybe he could get dropped and Ramsdale could come back in. It was just clear cut. Mm-hmm. This is Arsenal's number one. And I think it really, really helped to then start the season with a few big moments that, aside from maybe the penalty shootout against Porto, were kind of missing from his first season at Arsenal. Mm-hmm. I thought there was a lot more of that this year. There were great saves against Brentford, against Manchester United at Old Trafford. We nearly lost that at the end. And I thought consistently, more or less throughout the season, David Raya he has that presence in the box where he does come and claim crosses. We know there were a few iffier moments towards the end of the campaign, but usually really good with his feet. But I thought this season, compared to last year, there were also those moments, those big saves when games were on the line that maybe weren't quite there the year before. So I think that was a good first season at Arsenal. I think his second season was really, really good. Yeah,
I agree. I also gave him 8 out of 10. I do think towards the end of the season, whether it was fatigue or whether it was something else, the fact that maybe we weren't as secure defensively, I'm not 100% sure. There were moments where I thought he looks a bit at the end of his rope, if that makes sense. Like, he looked tired. Some of the decisions he made with the ball at his feet were not great. But I think what we've seen from David Raya this season is that we have a very, very good goalkeeper, super agile. The double save development, I think, is been really interesting. You can ask why he's had to make those saves, but more than once this season we saw him make a double save, make a very good save, then instantly save the follow-up as well. I think the one against Aston Villa in particular is the one that sticks in my mind. So yeah, 8 out of 10 for me. I think he can do better again next season. I hope he does. So we'll see where he goes. Seems a bit pointless to ask about Neto because he played one game and he tried to make a save outside his area. Do we sort of just put it in the context of like he wasn't needed? There was a point maybe where we needed him because we had to play a child in goal in an EFL Cup game at one point. So maybe we could say Neto, the deal is like a 1 out of 10, but Neto, the player, we don't necessarily have the data to rate him properly this season. Yeah,
like you say, the one time we did actually really need him, he was cup tied.
Yeah.
And then we gave David Raya a break and Neto he gave us that memorable moment, let's say, in Girona. I think we can move on.
I think so. Yeah, next season we can discuss our two £30 million goalkeepers. So that'll be fun. Let's move then from goalkeeper to right back. I suppose the place to start is Jurrien Timber. I'm going to go first on this one. I think the plan this season would have been, everything going well, for Jurrien Timber not to play quite as much as he did. But because of the injuries to Ben White, because it took Ben White some time after the injury and returning to the first team squad to to get up to speed, if he has even got fully up to speed. Timber has had to play a lot. And I think coming a year after suffering that cruciate ligament injury on his debut, his Premier League debut, he has done incredibly well. So I think in the context of that injury and demonstrating to us that in one-on-one situations, I think he is up there with the best fullbacks around. We all talked, didn't we, about like, the Vinicius versus Timber duel is going to be such an interesting one when we play Real Madrid, which I think is true. And I think for the most part, he came out on top of that. So for me, I'm going with an 8.5 for Jurrien Timber. I think there might be more to come from him, or perhaps should be a bit more to come from him in the opposition half. But defensively, based on the context of him coming into this season off the back of a cruciate ligament injury and the fact that he has put himself and his body on the line to the point where he's required surgery at the end of the season again, I think that shows a character and a sort of attitude that is really, really commendable, and he deserves his flowers this season.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm going to go 7.5. Maybe I feel like that's a bit harsh now. I've listened to you talk about it. Like you say, the amount of football he's played, I think nobody would have wanted that or planned for that after that serious injury. And it would have been, I think we'd have seen different levels to Jurrien Timber had he been able to get a break at some point and have, that job at right back shared with Ben White, as I'm sure was the plan.
Yeah.
Defensively, like you said, I think there's barely a winger. I think maybe that first leg against PSG is the only time that it's looked like he's really struggled with a winger all season. And in the second leg, he was exceptional. So even that, a week later against the same opponent, he was superb. I think there's more to come, which is probably why I'm leaving that gap. I think on the ball going forward, like you said, like you mentioned, there's more to come. There's an area that we've not, I don't think, seen everything Jurrien Timber can do. And I think probably playing so much football is the reason for that. I think coming back, having to play so much football, after almost a year out, a full season out, we've missed that Ben White overlap. We've missed those runs. And that's the question, is if Jurrien Timber's fully fit and fresh, does he provide a bit more of that? I think he probably does. We've just not been able to see it yet. So that's what I'm looking for next season, is what can Jurrien Timber do at 100%? Because I think the amount of football he's played this season, I think there's maybe times where he's maybe wanted to join the attack, make that overlap or cut inside. And it's like, if I go, I've got to get back again.
Yeah.
And has he got those sprints in him when he's playing every 3 days, every single game?
Sure.
If there was a few games where he had to pop up at left back as well earlier in the season because of injuries. So yeah, I think Jurrien Timber's had a really good season. 7.5.
Okay. I made a mistake there. I have 8 written down here rather than 8.5. So we're probably a bit closer than we thought. So I think I'll stick with my 8 for Jurrien Timber. Let's talk Ben White then and give me your rating on him. In what has been a difficult season, I think, for him physically. Yeah,
I've gone with a 5. I don't think it's not a comment on his performances, but if you asked, if we did that sort of like, what were we hoping for or expecting at the start of the season? I don't think he's played enough for me to go much higher than that. Like I would have had much higher hopes for the season for Ben White. And I think, to be honest, when he has played, he's still even not looked fully fit then. And he's come into the team. He's maybe come into the team, played a couple of games, gone out of the team again, and not quite been at the level that you'd expect from him. So, yeah, one that it's not his fault. He's been injured. He's come in. He's been rusty when he's come into the side. But I hope we see a lot more of him and a lot more from him next season.
Yeah, I just went with 6 because I think the injury and the need for him to have knee surgery in November, whenever it was, really had a big impact on the second half of his season. I think in the first part of the season, he was pretty good. He was much more his normal self. And then I think I have some forgiveness for a player who has surgery and doesn't quite hit the ground running, and then of course it becomes difficult to get rhythm and form and all of those things. So I think from is what we got from Ben White below what we expected? Probably, but I think there's some mitigating circumstances in there. This season he played 1,500 minutes. The season before he played well over 4,000 minutes. So I think it is really a story of how the injury and the inability to bounce back as quickly maybe as you would like from that injury. He seemed to have some little niggly problems of, in and out of the team and everything else. So I think that's affected him. But I'll stick with my 6. William Saliba is next. Look, I think he is an amazing player. I think he has this season carried a very, very heavy burden for Arsenal. I think he played more minutes than anybody else. I do think those minutes caught up with him. I think the lack of Gabriel alongside him caught up with him a little bit as well. But for me, it's hard to look beyond the fact that we've just asked him to play basically every minute of every game until the point came where he couldn't and his hamstring gave way. I think there were a couple of things or a couple of moments in this season where he made mistakes or did things that you do not necessarily associate with William Saliba. So from that perspective, and again, I think there's mitigation because of the load that's been placed on him. I've gone with a 7.5 for William Saliba this season.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think you players suffer as well, don't they? Like when you're doing things like this, they suffer more if they have a bad end to the season or a below par end to the season compared to, if the first month of the season was shaky, you've kind of forgotten about it.
Yeah.
A little bit. And I think Saliba maybe suffers from that a little bit. I was aware of that myself, so I gave him an 8.
Okay.
But I'm in an R in because of the way the season's ended, and even you go to those games against Madrid, and he was monstrously good, and then he was also the reason Madrid scored a goal, and it's how do you balance that? How do you weigh that up? It was his mistake that obviously gave them the goal at the Bernabeu that maybe gave them a little bit of hope of a comeback after we felt like we'd put it beyond all doubt. So I think it's tricky, but I think William Saliba's been excellent. I definitely agree with you that he's suffered for having played so much, then also for having played without Gabriel. I think that's that centre-back partnership. They lean on each other, not through necessity, but through shared quality. They lean on each other so much. We know that those backlines, they are partnerships. I think if you go back to a less stable Arsenal and you think of Mertesacker and Koscielny, and then you think of at times how each of them looked with different partners in the defence, and it was a different player that you got out of each of them whenever they played together. And I don't think Saliba and Gabriel, that's necessarily the case, but they take each other to a new level when they play as a pair. I'm going to go 8 out of 10. And I think another candidate for Arsenal's player of the season as well.
Well, then, seeing as you've mentioned Gabriel, you're up first for him. So where did you go with Gabriel, having given William Saliba an 8? Gabriel
9.
Okay.
I think over the last couple of years, that as that partnership's developed, I think we've seen the quality of William Saliba, and I think Gabriel has jumped to new levels over the last 18 months, 2 years. And I think we saw that consistently this season. And if you go back a couple of seasons, you think to yourself, we've got a great defender there, but he could be a bit rash. He might be a bit overly aggressive. And I think all of that is basically gone from his game completely, more or less. I don't ever think Gabriel might jump in and get caught out or get a bit too tight and be turned. I think he manages whoever you've got up against him, a proper beefy number 9, somebody running in behind when he has to go out to left back and cover and go one-on-one against a winger. I back him to win every single one of those duels. And then you sprinkle on top of it the fact that he's the most prolific defender in the league. And I think not just the most prolific defender in the league, but almost the way that we obviously remember horribly going to Stoke and those Rory Delap throw-ins and that sort of pang in your stomach every time the ball went out in one of those areas for a throw. And the fact that we've got a weapon like that now from set pieces, that you can look at the fear of opposition defences, the arms and everybody scrambling and talking to each other and being hyper aware of not just the fact that Arsenal are dangerous, but that Gabriel in particular is such a threat from those moments. And I think there's a presence and an aura there that is invaluable almost from those corners. So on top of being as solid as any defender in the league or the world over the past couple of years, to have that added to our game as well is absolutely massive.
Yeah, I went with 8.5 for Gabriel. I think we really missed him towards the end of the season, and I think it leads into an interesting discussion about Jakub Kiwior and how we're going to rate him in a few minutes' time. I think with Gabriel, the goal-scoring prowess that you mentioned is obvious, but I also think we missed him towards the end of the season when it came to defensive set pieces. He's just such a presence defensively in our box and in the opposition box. I think he has, as you say, really, really established himself as one of the best central defenders in the world. And I do hope that this summer, when we're talking to players about new contracts and new deals and keeping our best players at the club, his name is very, very close to the top of the list for a new deal, an extension, a pay rise, because I think he's absolutely 100% earned it. So for me, he's alongside Saliba, when the two of them are together, are just the best central defensive partnership in the world. We've missed him. I think until the point where he picked up that injury, he was, and maybe still is, in with a shout for the Player of the Season award at Arsenal. So for me, an 8.5 didn't go quite as high as you, but that leaves us to Jakub Kiwior, a player who stepped into the breach a little bit when Gabriel got injured. And this is what I mean about a player rating being based on kind of what you expect from that individual. I think there was a lot of anxiety, shall I say, about missing Gabriel for big games. Like, he missed the Real Madrid games, didn't he?
Yeah, it was Fulham was the game he got injured in. It was the last game before Real Madrid, I think.
So everyone's going, oh my God, we're going to play Real Madrid. We're without Gabriel. Kiwior's coming in. He's had good games. He's had not so good games. But what I think we see from Kiwior this season is that if you give a player a run of games, a good player, a run of games in their favourite position, you're much more likely to get a tune out of them than if you play them at left back for a few weeks, or if they're coming in cold, or if they're playing on the right side of the centre halves. I think he did really well. I think he did pretty much as well as you could expect anyone to do in that context, in those circumstances. So, there'll be people giving out to me now because I'm going to give Kiwior a 7.5 and I gave Saliba a 7.5. But I just think, based on where we were when he came into the team and what he's actually delivered, I think you've got to give him some credit for that.
I completely agree. I've gone 8. I've the exact same thinking as you. I think we saw Jakub Kiwior last season fill in at left back for a little bit, and he did all right for a little bit, and then he got caught out and lost the place again. And this season, I think there was a concern, if we need him to come in for 10 games, what's he actually capable of? How badly are we going to miss Gabriel? And honestly, we did miss Gabriel, but nowhere near as much as people thought. We weren't anywhere nearly as exposed as people thought. And I think, like you say, it's the first time that Jakub Kiwior has had a run of games in his position as an Arsenal player, which is kind of mad after the amount of time he's been at the club. But this is the first time that we've seen him, and not come in cold, but also not come in for like maybe a cup game and you know, well, I'm not going to play next week. Like, they can't do much for rhythm, but also like mentally for your confidence. And I think to come in when Gabriel got injured, it was like Calafiori was out at the same time. It was very much a case of no matter what happens, you're going to get to play a run of games now.
It's a difficult role, isn't it? You know, the backup.
I think it takes some of the pressure away, though, as well. It's like, if I make a mistake, well, I'm still going to play next week anyway. And you don't have to perform today or on Saturday to play again next Saturday. You're playing. We've got no other centre-backs. And I think that, in a way, can relieve a bit of the pressure. You're not trying to prove a point every single time you step on the pitch. You've just got a job to do. And we saw, I think, during this last couple of months, there were obviously, shaky moments. Early on against Real Madrid, a few players had them. But I think as those couple of months have gone on, he's grown and grown into the team and that position. And I guess probably a feeling of belonging in the team as well. And that place being earned and not just taken for granted. So, yeah, I thought, the games against Real Madrid, he was good. Against PSG, he was solid. He didn't let us down, I think, in those games. And that was the concern, that having Jakub Kiwior in there for those games against the top opposition, he'd be exposed and we'd be exposed as a result. That didn't happen. And I think, you go back to the Bernabeu, he was excellent that night. Against Newcastle a few weeks ago, I think was probably the best he's played in an Arsenal shirt.
Yeah, he was great.
And he's grown and grown, and you get to the summer, and 2-3 months ago, everyone would have gone, let's see what we can get for Jakub Kiwior in the summer. And now he's probably a player that people would like to hold on to as that backup centre-back in that position.
Yeah.
Or if Arsenal do get interest for him this summer, it's going to be for a hell of a lot more money than it would have been 2 or 3 months back.
Yeah, I think that is going to be an interesting one, because if you're looking at easing the burden or making sure that you don't overburden Saliba and Gabriel next season, you do need a reliable backup. And it is maybe the worst position to be in as a professional footballer, is like backup centre half. Number 2 goalkeepers, they live with that. They're like, yeah, I'm a number 2 goalkeeper. I'll train. I'll play the odd cup game. I might get on if he gets injured or suspended or whatever. But like, this is my job and I accept that. But I think as a backup centre half at a club like Arsenal, you're good enough to be able to play. Therefore, you're good enough to be able to go somewhere else and play regularly, first team football, etc., etc. And I would be very surprised if that wasn't in Kiwior's mind this summer. But at the same time, we've seen this season what placing such a big burden on Saliba and Gabriel has done to their form and also physically, where Gabriel has done his hamstring and required surgery. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with Kiwior. I would have been, 3 months ago, we should probably sell him, see what we can get. At the same time, I'm thinking, I look at some of the other options that we have available to us, and there's a player we're going to talk about now in a second, but can I rely on that player? That is the question.
Say the options we have available or not a lot of the time.
Or not. Okay, so that brings us to Ricardo Calafiori, one of last summer's big signings. Give me your rating.
I'm really torn on this one. I have 5.5. I think you could argue lower, the amount of money that was spent on Calafiori and how much football we've actually got out of him. And I also think if you take into account just sort of him playing football when he's been on the pitch, you could go a bit higher. I think when he's played, he's been really exciting. He's a player that I think that's a large part of my disappointment. Isn't just that we've been weak and having lost a player, but as a fan, I've not got to watch him more because I enjoy watching him play football. I think there are, maybe question marks defensively still. My mind goes back to Nottingham Forest away, and he started at left back that night. And you're thinking early on, the one thing with him seems to be, that tricky, pacey wingers. Those one-on-one situations, how does he handle that? Does he get too close and pull them down? Does he leave a bit too much space and let him get the cross in because he knows maybe he's not quite got the pace? And that game felt like it was going to be a big test, and straight away you thought, all right, here we go, Callum Hudson-Odoi. And it was 2 minutes into the game, he turned him and Calafiori just pulled him down. It's right, okay, great, 90 minutes on a booking then. That's my question with, but everything else, I think the presence and kind of mentality and aura of the guy, I think you have to be a special personality to score your first goal for a club the way that he did at the Etihad early in the season. I think you have to be a special personality to be enjoying the game in Eindhoven, and then go, yeah, you know what, I'll join the attack, and pop up in the wrong area completely and slide one home with your weak foot. And, you know, likewise to come on for Lewis Skelly at Wolves and be the player who delivered the winning goal. I think there is a lot to like and be excited about with Ricardo Calafiori. But we have not seen anywhere near enough of the guy. And for that amount of money, and we're talking about, you know, Kivior coming in, but, you know, we're talking about the left-back position, and there's another player who's going to get very, very high ratings from us both. And, you know, sure, that's nice that he's had the chance to break through. But we spent a lot of money on a left-back or a left centre-back earlier last summer, and maybe couldn't sign players in other positions because of that. And then we've ended up not having him at left back for most of the season. And then when we needed a left centre back, we didn't have him either. And I think it makes it really, really hard to rate him highly. For when he's been on the pitch, much higher, but for his season, he's not been on it anyway.
Yeah, that's what I had as well, 5.5, because I think there is a lot to like about Ricardo Calafiori, the player. There really is. I think it's worth mentioning as well, at the start of the season, he was the third youngest player in the first team squad, which is, you know, something to note. But like you say, we spent a lot of money on him. He hasn't been available. The injuries are a worry, to be honest. Beyond the lack of availability, it's worrying how he hasn't been able to get fit. But maybe, you know, a good summer off will help us in that regard. I really like him when he plays. I agree with you. There are things that he can learn defensively, but you know, he only turned 23 a few days ago. So there is time for him to learn and to be able to deal with those players like Hudson-Odoi, for example. On the ball, I think he's fucking spectacular, I have to say. I think he's capable of producing things that are just really exciting, a lot of fun. But the injuries and the lack of availability have been a big, big problem. And I think in the context of the transfer fee that we paid and how much maybe we might have needed him at times, I can't go any higher than 5.5.
But how do you look at like the decision to sign him now that we've seen him a bit? And imagine he hadn't had all these injuries. The decision to sign him, I think last summer everyone, like a left back really, or a centre back. We don't need that. Have you, when you think of last summer and our issue breaking teams down at times, do you see how if you couldn't add the striker you wanted, that actually adding this guy at centre back who pops off a pass and then carries on his run would be a great way to add something extra to break teams down? Well,
that was my thinking when he signed, was that, okay, he's going to be this agent of, I don't want to say agent of chaos, because I think there's something very deliberate about the way that he plays and the way that he uses his running power and his ability on the ball to sort of pop up in areas. You saw it even the other week against Newcastle when he came on at half-time. And for the first 5 minutes, he ended up playing like inside left, and he was here, there, and everywhere. And Newcastle were like, what the fuck is going on here? Where is this guy? How do we deal with him? How do we mark him? Whose job is it to pick him up?
Why is he not just standing on the halfway line?
Why is he not like alongside Jakub Kivior at centre half, which is where centre halves are supposed to operate? I think we have missed something through his lack of availability. We've gained something very obviously because there's been room for another player to come in and develop. And I'm not saying that if you can't sign a striker, sign a maverick left-sided centre-half come left back. I don't know that that's the solution that I personally would have gone for, but I do think that potentially we missed something from the team because of his lack of availability this season. I think there are bigger questions about how we allocated our resources last summer, for sure. And I think, for me anyway, while I can't give him a high mark. It is a low mark or a lower mark tinged with regret, because I do feel like there is something there that we really could have used. So it is a touch unfortunate. But as you said, it did make room for somebody else to come through. And that player, of course, is Miles Lewis-Skelly, who has been probably the player who has surpassed expectations more than anybody else. Because I remember being out in the States last summer when they were on preseason, and everybody was talking about Ethan Nwaneri. He was the guy, because I think primarily because he plays in an attacking position, and your eyes are more naturally drawn to those players and to think about what it is that they can bring to your team, right? And Lewis-Skelly was there alongside him, played a lot of minutes in preseason, but I don't think anybody could really have predicted the way that he took his opportunity this season, the way it came along, the personality he showed. There are things that he did that I think he will absolutely learn from. But I think he also brought something to the team. You know, if we've got some regrets about what we missed with Calafiori, I think Lewis-Skelly brought some of that as well. He provided us with some of the moments of the season. You know, the Holland celebration thing, amazing. Even if he was taken to task for it by sections of the media who really, really should have known better. There were moments, I think, when his inexperience was exposed, but I absolutely back him to learn from those. So Lewis-Skelly, I'm giving a 9.
I'm going 10.
10? Wow, yeah. Okay.
I think if you can't give a 10 out of 10 for this, then if I don't give a 10 out of 10 for this, I don't know what a 10 would look like. Coming into the team, breakthrough, 17 years old, and looking like you belong immediately, and not just looking like you belong, but looking like you belong every 3 days.
Yeah.
3 games a week. And even beyond that, I think probably stepping it up a gear in the bigger games as well. I think he was possibly, you look at what his best performances were, and I think you're maybe thinking Man City, Tottenham at home.
Even the debut, though, PSG at home, didn't he start like for the first time against PSG at home, I think? And he was brilliant.
I just don't think you can. Basically 10 out of 10. As I say, to break into the team and do it in this seamless a fashion is the stuff of dreams. So yeah, I can't. I think it's one of those where it'll be very different next season. Next season, it's like it's impossible for him to get more than 8 because the bar's been set now. And now he's going to have to be exceptional for a whole season. Otherwise, people will be going, "Oh, he's not quite developed the way that we'd all hoped."
Yeah.
But here we've got a kid who has stepped into the team and not missed a beat. And I think handling all of that, and then handling a bit of scrutiny that's come his way as well, just like water off a duck's back. All of it to him. He looks like the coolest character in the squad. Not phased, and I think it'll be an interesting challenge for him next season. Because I think a couple of games late on this year, and I think of Paris in particular, the game out there was an element of those little. He tucks his body in and he rolls and he escapes pressure, and now that teams have seen him and played against him once or twice, you could see some of the PSG players starting to read those rolls and those turns. And that's the interesting question that I think for next season, not just doing it consistently over a whole season, but you're going to be playing against players next year who know you. You're going to be playing against players who maybe start to read those feints. And then what have you got? Can you turn the other way? Can you decide to disguise it in a different way maybe? Or pick and choose your moments? And I think that'll be a really interesting one because I think that that game kind of sticks out because it was basically the only game that he wasn't perfect at it all season. The away game in Paris, and I think especially after we'd conceded, there was maybe an element of trying to force things a little bit. And that'll be a big test and a big challenge for him next season.
Sure.
But I can't wait to see how he does it because, right now, like you, I find it hard to imagine a hurdle that he won't just skip over.
No, absolutely. And we share the same birthday, so I'm quite predisposed to Miles Lewis-Skelly. Brilliant story. And now you've made me feel harsh, but I want to give him something to aim for next season, Lewis. Only got a 9. Yeah. I'll show that old Irish cunt I'll be 10 next season. Alexander Zinchenko, you get the privilege of going first here.
4.5, I think. Half a mark off for scoring against PSV and apologising to their fans in a tie that was already over, a team that he once spent a few months on loan with. I think it's, if it wasn't clear already at the end of last season, and I think maybe a season ends and the summer comes around and Lewis-Skelly hadn't come through yet, and there was maybe a world where there was an injury for Calafiori, and you think Zinchenko could have reclaimed some of his Arsenal career after a move didn't materialise for him. And obviously that didn't happen. I think it became obvious pretty quickly that Mikel Arteta has moved on from Alexander Zinchenko. I don't know what the breakdown is of minutes, but it feels like over the last 6 months he's actually spent more minutes in midfield than at left back, in a position that people talked about him playing in for a couple of years, and Mikel Arteta clearly didn't want to do it. And I think it's obviously by now the best thing for all involved is for a fresh start for Alexander Zinchenko. Yeah. And I hope that when that happens, everybody can kind of recall that first season at Arsenal when he was a big part of us becoming a team that could compete for the Premier League, because we weren't that before, and he came in and then we were. And I think that should be remembered. But yeah, he's had such little impact this season that, it's obvious that everyone needs to move on. Yeah,
I think so. He's I think only played 789 minutes across all competitions this season, only 23 appearances in a season where we played a lot of games. So I've given him a 4, to be honest. I just think that lack of trust from Mikel Arteta has been evident for a long time, and I do think this summer, with a year left on his contract, we should see him move on. It is the area of the pitch in which I guess we have been overstocked because, well, Lewis-Skelly, Calafiori, Timbers played there, Jakub Kivior, who we mentioned, and Kieran Tierney as well, who's been in the squad too. Listen, I very much enjoyed Kieran Tierney's end to the season. Playing on the left wing, not for the first time. Mikel Arteta threw him on, but obviously he too is a bit part player. He too is a player that the team has moved on and sort of left behind a bit. He started 2 Premier League games this season, and that tells you a lot. But I'm giving him a 6 because it's kind of more or less what I expected. When he stayed, we knew that he wasn't going to move on in the summer after picking up that injury. And then when he came back, his chances were always going to be pretty limited. But when he played, when he came on, he gave you his full effort. He gave you everything that he always has given this club. He leaves, I think, with his head held very high, a goal on the final day. But basically, we got what I expected from Kieran Tierney this season, which wasn't a lot. And I don't mean that in terms of his performance levels. I just mean his involvement. Yeah,
I think we got more, a little bit more than I expected, to be honest. Right. I got 6.5. Kieran Tierney got on the pitch for both wins against Real Madrid, and I did not see that coming at all. I think he came on and ended the derby on the wing at home as well. And then the goal. The goal, which is the first time Kieran Tierney finally scored a goal for Arsenal and looked happy about it instead of just furious at everyone and everything. It was I don't know how many goals that is for Arsenal in total. 7, 8 maybe?
I'll look that up while you're talking.
And he smiled. And I didn't know that he could do anything after scoring but look to the heavens and scream, fuck everyone, because that's all he ever seemed to do when he'd scored for us previously. Yeah, and I'm happy for him that he's been fit, that he's found that fitness. I know he's obviously not played much football, but was gutted for him on a personal level, not just because Arsenal couldn't sell him, but when he got injured so early last summer. Obviously a big summer for him playing at the Euros for Scotland. He got the injury. He'd had like a decent season until he'd got injured for Real Sociedad last season, and yeah, I'm happy for him that he's managed to get fit, stay fit, and hopefully can have a fresh start with that health somewhere else.
Sure. Okay, 6 goals, by the way, for Arsenal. And I know what you mean. I think everybody just has that picture of him scoring that goal against West Brom in the snow. And as you say, just being like raging against the world. But, you know, it was a great way for him to sign off. Okay, let's move into midfield. We've done our defenders. There's obviously no point talking about Takehiro Tomiyasu, unfortunately, who spent the season out injured and is going to be injured for a significant part of next season too, which does...
I completely forgot until I saw last week that he made an appearance this season.
He did. He came on against Southampton for like 6 minutes and then things went wrong again. But I do think, you know, people get very frustrated with players who are injured, and I get it. I understand it. But I think when you're talking about a player like Tomiyasu, who is... you know, really dedicated professional who just wants to be out there on the pitch. His injury isn't because he's a messer or his lifestyle is crap or, you know, I have a lot of sympathy for him, and I think people should look at the amount of time he's been out injured and recognize that this is a situation that is probably very, very serious for him. So we'll keep everything crossed that he can recover fully and maybe play a part in the second half of next season. I mean, there's another player who, if he was fully fit this season, would have played quite a lot of football, somebody who we really, really have missed. We're into midfield. I guess I get to start because you did Zinchenko. Let's start with Jorginho. I've gone with a 5.5 for Jorginho. His involvement has been quite 15 appearances
minimal?
Minimal is exactly the word I was looking for. I did think he might play a little bit more than he has. I'm not sure he's been massively injured or anything like that towards the end of the season. There was that issue that he picked up in the game against Brentford, I think. But beyond that, he's been available, but hasn't really played as much as I thought he might. And I think maybe there's an argument to be made. He could have played a bit more than he did, but he hasn't. He's announced his departure to Flamengo, I think in time for the monstrous abomination that is the Club World Cup. He's going to be involved for them. A player who I like, I really warmed to during his time at Arsenal because, you know, when we were signing him, it was like, oh no, not another one from Chelsea. But I think he's been a real solid pro, technical player. Maybe the legs aren't what they were, and that's been exposed a few times. But I think generally speaking, he's been a very, very positive addition to the squad. But this season has barely played, so I think 5. I might round it down to a 5, actually.
Yeah, I'll give him that extra half a point back and go 5.5. Okay. I think it has been a bit disappointing, particularly because he played quite a big role last season, and I thought he played really, really well last season. I thought he had a good partnership with Declan Rice in midfield. And I do wonder if the legs have just gone from that run of games last season. He played less than you'd have expected for Italy at the Euros in the summer, and then came back and didn't really get a look in this year. And I think maybe, 9 Premier League starts is more than I actually thought it was. But I think they didn't really come in games that mattered particularly, or games that you'd have thought, were really crucial games for Arsenal. It was I think a disappointing to see him that little, and my mind goes back to that final season of Mikel Arteta at Arsenal a little bit, and how he'd given more than he probably had left in the tank the previous season, and just came back for that final year and really had nothing left. And he did pick up more injuries than Jorginho has this year, that time around. But I think it's made me wonder a little bit if the same sort of thing has happened to Jorginho, basically. Where he maybe played a bit more, or not. I don't think he even played more last season than you'd have expected. But I think when he did play, it all came in quite quick succession. There were times when he played back to back 3 games in a week that none of us had really expected or thought he was still capable of. And yeah, I think it's maybe you're caught up with him a little bit. And good luck to him in Brazil. I think it's obviously rare for a Brazilian-born player to grow up, and he's not played in Brazil, and here he is in his mid-30s, and he finally gets to go and play there. So I hope he has a really good time.
We're moving on then. Thomas Partey, the next player in midfield that we've got to give our ratings to.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to go with 6. I think he's been more available than in previous seasons, but I think that comes at maybe a bit of a physical cost. The Arsenal, I think, look our best when we play with intensity, and I don't think Thomas Partey always helps us play with intensity. Either with his passing, maybe 1-2 extra touches, and defensively as well. I don't think it's an accident or a coincidence that we're maybe looking at spending a lot of money to sign another player to play in that position. And Thomas Partey maybe, if he stays, takes on that Jorginho role for next season instead.
Yeah, I gave him a 6.5 because of the availability thing, because based on what I expected after last season, I didn't think he would be as available as he was, and he's filled in at right back as well quite a bit. So I gave him the extra point there. I completely agree with you about midfield, though. I feel like this is a team that needs to move in a different direction from him. He may well stay. We'll have to wait and see. But as we're speaking and recording this, there's talk of Zubimendi having a medical, and he's obviously going to be the guy who plays a lot there next season, which I think tells you something. So let's talk about Declan Rice then. And I think he is a player who, if you talk about football being a game of two halves, maybe he had a season of two halves in a way, because listen, he went all the way to the finals of the European Championships with England after a long season with Arsenal that ended with a bit of sadness because of the way last season ended, pipped to the post by Manchester City. Then in the European Championship final, he gets all the way there and England lose. I think he looked absolutely exhausted in the first part of this season. He really did. The red card remains one of my low points of the season, and that's not to blame him. I just think as one of the things that had an impact on our season, it's right there. But in the second part of the season, I think we saw the best of Declan Rice, a player who could really dominate games, and none more so than the Real Madrid game where he pulled those 2 free kicks out of the locker. It means we've got something else for next season. If and when we do get free kicks in those positions again, we don't tend to get a lot of them, but maybe Nicolas Jover can work on a bit of that during this season. Lads, as soon as you get to 30 yards out, see if you can win a free kick, and Big Deck will stick it in the top corner. So for me, I've gone with 8 out of 10 for Declan Rice, because first half of the season was a bit below where I expected him to be, even if I understood it. But he rose again, if you like, in part 2.
Yeah, I see the season the same as you. I go 7.5. I think that last couple of months of the season, we've seen the Declan Rice that we know is there, but I do think it took a long time for us to see him play, at his level, where he can dominate games, he can dominate midfields, he can dominate opposition teams, the all-round performances against Real Madrid, not just the goals, which were obviously spectacular. It's not often. I mean, it's not often you get 2 goals in the same game probably compete for your goal of the season.
Sure.
2 goals from the same player, both from free kicks within minutes of each other, is and was pretty spectacular, and I think it's something that we're all going to remember for a very, very long time. And probably when we look back, years on from now, look back at this season, that'll be sort of the big memory in a positive sense, would be Declan Rice bending the ball in twice against Real Madrid. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I thought he wasn't quite himself until that second half of the season, and like you, I get it, but yeah, unfortunately, that didn't help us. It didn't help us. We looked sluggish. We didn't get going really at the start of the season, and Declan Rice not being near his best, I think, was probably a big part of that.
Speaking about somebody who wasn't necessarily near their best this season, you get first dibs on Martin Odegaard.
6.5 for Martin Odegaard. Yeah. And I think Martin Odegaard has been pretty good this season. Like, I don't think he's been... This debate becomes like, we need a new number 10, he's rubbish. Like, I think Martin Odegaard's been pretty good. I think there are probably still not that many players out there who play in that position who this season have been obviously better than Martin Odegaard, but the bar has been set so high for me over the past couple of seasons. I think there are mitigating circumstances. Not having Saka for a while, not having Ben White for a while, having his own injury early on in the season, and not only missing a chunk of football, but I think it is really important to remember that he came back from that injury and was playing 90 minutes again immediately. He was not eased back into the team.
Yeah.
You talked about Saliba earlier being one, and maybe Timber a little bit. He's a player, I think, who suffers maybe more than anyone from the fact that we don't have an alternative. And he plays 90 minutes of every game, or more or less 90 minutes of every game, because there isn't somebody who can come in and play his role and play a role that's central to the team with and without the ball. So, and we've talked about it so many times. Martin Odegaard is everything that he is with the ball. He's also the guy who orchestrates, conducts that press when we don't have the ball, and organises the team defensively from the front. So I have some sympathy for the season that he's had, and I think we all know that he's capable of a hell of a lot more, and hopefully we'll see it next year.
I also went with 6.5 because based on the expectations I had, he's fallen below those. I do think there are good reasons why his season has been not as good, or not at the level that people expected. I don't think it's simply because, he's a bad player now, that's it, let's wash our hands of him. As you said, no Saka, no Ben White, no striker for quite a significant part of this season. I feel like players like Martin Odegaard, this maybe is the most redundant observation that anybody will ever make, but if you're a playmaker who's looking for players to make runs and you don't have the players in front of you making those runs, it does make your life a little more difficult. I think there have been aspects of his game which have been not as good as they should be. The power in his shooting that he's found over the last couple of weeks, where's that been? That's kind of where I am with him. I think he, in many ways, became a lightning rod for the team's underperformance this season. And I think much like the team itself, without relitigating the transfer windows or anything like that, but with what we had available, there are reasons why Arsenal didn't do as well this season as we should have done, or based as we did last season, right? Similarly, on an individual level, there are reasons why Martin Odegaard did not do as well this season as he has done in previous seasons. I don't think 12 assists and 6 goals is terrible. Can he do better? Yes, absolutely. But I think, as I said, he became very much a lightning rod for some of the wider criticism. And I get it, but I don't think it was as bad as some people were saying. So 6.5 for me, which brings us to Mikel Merino, a signing that we made last summer as well. He missed the first part of the season with a shoulder injury. Didn't have much of a preseason, of course, because he too went all the way to the final of the European Championships with Spain, came in, had that injury, and then you're always playing catch up. I suppose I have to give him a 7 because he exceeded expectations in goal scoring terms. We didn't get to see him a lot in midfield. And what we saw in midfield at times was okay, wasn't brilliant, not spectacular, some good, some bad. But when he was pressed into action as a striker, I think he gave the team something we really needed. Goal against Real Madrid was fantastic. I can't remember how many goals he's ended up with this season. I think 7 or 8 anyway. So based on that redeployment, I've given him a 7.
I guess I've got the same because I've written down 5.5 and I've written down 8.5.
Right.
Because I think there's a Mikel Merino before Dubai, which is a slightly disappointing midfield signing. I think a player who, like you say, suffering from coming into the team with no pre-season, both on a fitness level, but also a familiarity aspect of that, coming into this role in midfield and just not being able to get any kind of rhythm, didn't get many starts in a row and looked a bit underwhelming. And then we all thought, well, now everything's completely fucked because we had nobody to play up front. And then he came off the bench at Leicester, and it was not a perfect striker. It was, games where he was, it obviously hurt us to have Mikel Merino up front instead of a striker, especially early on in that run, West Ham and the trip to Old Trafford. But he delivered, I think, so much more than anyone could have expected. And I hope it will kickstart his Arsenal career a little bit. We go ahead to next season. It's a fresh start. We all start from zero. And I think Mikel Merino needed something to kind of get a sense of belonging at Arsenal and the fans singing his name and a run of games in the team, and you're not just there in case a couple of people get injured, that sort of thing. We talked about with Kivio earlier, maybe. And hopefully he's had that now, and he becomes a bit more of a player that we can trust and Mikel Arteta trusts. We know in midfield that he can be a threat to get on the end of things, but he can be a combative player defensively as well. We can really help that press if we're on the front foot. He'll get back and win his duels if we're in our third. I think he's a player who we can massively rely on, and it didn't always feel like that earlier in the season. But the way that he came in, scored some important goals, scored against Real Madrid, scored the winner against Chelsea, scored at Anfield, obviously. It's not just popping up with goals, but goals that have mattered and changed results. And I hope that I think it's made the fans feel a lot better about him. And I hope that it's the same for him, that he feels a lot more of an Arsenal player now going into next season. Yeah.
Let's move on to the forward line then. You can go first on Bukayo Saka.
8 for Bukayo Saka. I think he was brilliant at the start of the season. Those run of assists. Something that we missed so much when he was out. We talk about the threat at set pieces, and we lost it because the delivery wasn't as good. And we talk about the movement and Gabriel in the box, but when it was Ødegaard or maybe Nwaneri, maybe Trossard out there taking some of those corners, we weren't threatening anymore, even with the same players in the box, because the delivery just wasn't there. So a lot of those assists earlier on in the season did come from that. As the season went on, obviously we got the injury, which I think we all knew where the season was going at that point. We're all very grateful that he got back in time for Real Madrid. And I think in those games, you saw we've all known what Bukayo Saka is capable of. And he wasn't fully fit, but you saw that they were absolutely terrified of him. David Alaba yanking him down early on in the first game. That was, and then steaming through him early on in the second game as well. I think that's the sign of a left back who knows, I've got nothing against this guy, and I better somehow intimidate him and make sure he doesn't keep running at me, because if he does, I'm not going to be able to handle him. I think to do that, to come back from the penalty miss at the Bernabeu, that was, I think, huge. And we're going to see, hopefully, the next stage of Bukayo Saka, which isn't just a special player making the right decisions, but a player who maybe a bit more often, we channel our game through him, but I don't see him as much going and demanding the ball and saying, right, we're not playing well, give it to me, I'll fix it. I think I see other players over the past couple of years at Arsenal not know where to look, and then they look to him. And I think that next step now is we see him half a step earlier. They don't even have to look for him. He just goes and tells them, right, give me the ball, I'll take care of it. And I think that ability's there. I think the personality's there. And now it's just about him being on the pitch and doing it, because I think he's ready for that.
Yeah, I went with 7.5 because I think obviously the post-injury performances weren't quite at the level that we've seen from him, and I understand it. It's not criticism. I think it's just what we saw, goal at the Bernabeu apart, which was a great moment, a huge moment for him and for Arsenal. I remember talking to James earlier in the season about whether or not Bukayo Saka was going to match Thierry Henry's assist record in the Premier League. He was on course. He was on course, and I think your point about corner delivery and the goals we score from set pieces, you miss Bukayo Saka's corner delivery, you miss Gabriel in there, and you're much less potent than you were. So I do think the first part of his season is underrated. Or maybe not underrated, but I think we got pretty much what we'd expect from Bukayo Saka. That high-level end product, goals and assists at a level that no other player in this Arsenal team can generate. But the injury obviously had a big impact, and that then played a part in the second half of his season. So 7.5 for me. Gabriel Jesus is next up. I've just gone with 6 for Gabriel Jesus because I'd sort of written off the idea that he might ever score again, and then he discovered how to score again, and then got a huge big injury, which, I feel so sorry for him, having come back to life, if you like, and shown that he can find the back of the net again, was playing with some confidence, and would have been a very useful player for Arsenal to have in the second half of the season. But obviously the big injury, like so many players this season who we've discussed already, and some players that we will discuss, I think, before the end, the injury played a massive part. So a lovely little flurry there when he scored. I think Crystal Palace would be glad to see the back of him. Didn't he score like 5 goals against Crystal Palace in a week, something like that? But then the injury and the lack of availability,
days.
The injuries, have sort of punctuated his time at Arsenal. So good in that first 3-4 months before the World Cup in 2002 when he signed, or 2022 rather, when he signed. He was just so good, and he helped bring the team to another level, a bit like Zinchenko, as you mentioned earlier. But then the injury and just never being able to quite get back, and I can't go beyond 6.
Yeah, I think 6 out of 10 for me as well. 10 out of 10 when playing against Crystal Palace. But it's such a disappointment. But I think that few weeks there when he was back, and it really was short. I think it was about a month, maybe. He played, I can remember, played really well against Monaco in the Champions League. He scored those goals against Crystal Palace, and within a month or so, he was injured again. Kind of like you alluded to a bit there, maybe just kind of sums up his time at Arsenal, right? He gets fit, he looks like he's putting it all together and flying, and then an injury comes along, and then we all kind of sat there thinking, I guess we'll never see that version of Gabriel Jesus again. On a very personal level, I found it nice that we got that. I wish it was more, but we got that month of Gabriel Jesus, because I think that first half a season at Arsenal, he transformed our attack, and I hope that gets remembered, because we were night and day going forward with him in attack. Like you mentioned there, Zinchenko, but it was Gabriel Jesus more than Zinchenko even that came in and took us to a new level. And it was just a little, the Monaco performance I think was great in the Champions League, and then those games against Palace. It was just a reminder that happened, because it's so easy to forget when you've had, the injuries, the goal droughts. And I hope he's back fit as soon as possible. And who knows, we might need him at some point next season.
Yes,
I think he probably, without the injury, almost certainly would have left Arsenal this summer. And now he'll still be at, like, I guess, Kieran Tierney's situation almost. He'll be an Arsenal player next season. So.
Yeah. I'm not sure what the contractual situation is, whether he's got a year or 2 years left, but certainly he's not going anywhere this summer because of the injury. I don't think we should be planning around him, by the way, just to be clear. But as a sort of bonus player, you know what I mean?
Yeah, of course.
Like if you properly strengthen your squad, and then come December, between December and June, if you can get Gabriel Jesus fit and staying fit, if you're, for want of a better way of putting it, if your Raheem Sterling option from this season, next season is Gabriel Jesus, I think you're in a better place. Kai Havertz, gimme.
7 I've gone for with Kai Havertz, and it's not really his fault. I think we would see so much more. We would have seen so much more from Kai Havertz if he had the support around him. If we'd, signed somebody so he didn't have to carry the burden so massively. Then he had to carry it even more because Ødegaard was out. Then he had to carry it more because Saka was out. And I think it's absolutely no wondering that eventually his body broke down, and I think they talk about it maybe being a bit of bad luck, the way the injury eventually came around in Dubai. But I think anybody could see that injury was just around the corner. Whether it was going to come from blocking a ball or sprinting onto a through ball or jumping and landing funny, his body was going to give up eventually because the amount that he had to put in to the first 5-6 months of the season. Another player who played a lot last summer as well.
Yeah,
going all the way to I think the quarterfinals of the Euros with Germany, but he started every single game. Mm-hmm. I think that was a real shame that we lost Kai Havertz, and a player who, without Ødegaard, without Saka, and without good enough replacements for those players, just didn't have the support this season that you'd like to have from him in that number 9 position, because I think over the course of about 12 months from January to January, when he started playing up, he played up front for Arsenal. We didn't really play in midfield anymore. I think we saw a really excellent striker, and it would come into my thinking for this summer when we're talking about signing a striker. I think there are certain fees, certain ages of players. And you sign players, and then there's an expectation from the player, maybe from the fans, that new signing starts every game. And I don't think Arsenal need a striker necessarily to start every single game next season. I think Arsenal need a striker who can play sometimes with Havertz, can play instead of Havertz, and sometimes will come off the bench when Arsenal need a goal in the last 20 minutes and replace Kai Havertz. He's definitely a player that, for all the talk of wanting a new striker and signing a new striker, he's a player that I want to see play up front plenty next season as well.
Yeah, I think he will. For me, it's you look at some of the discourse. I went with 7 as well, by the way. I think he was on course for at least 20 goals in the season at the point he got injured, which was in February. And he had 15 goals and 5 assists at that point. I think it's not a stretch to think he could have got at least another 5 goals and maybe a few more. So he was on course for a pretty good goal-scoring season. I've seen people say in the discussion and in the desire for a new striker, which I absolutely understand, and I want to see Arsenal address that situation this summer. Let's get rid of Havertz and just bring in somebody else. And if this season has taught us anything at all, it's that you need redundancy in your squad. You need, we keep talking about the burden placed on players. We keep talking about the team needing to be a bit more tactically, to have a bit more tactical variety, all of those things, right? You don't just say, right, well, we've got a new striker, off you go, Kai, see you later, arrivederci, thanks for everything, here's a fucking gold clock. You keep both of those players. You have both of those players available to you. What do Arsenal fans want next season? They want to win the Premier League. We've shown that it can't be done this season with just one striker. Even if you get a tune out of Mikel Merino as a standing guy, you need at least 2 good centre-forward options. And sort of just harking back to Gabriel Jesus, unfortunately, he wasn't a good option for us for a long part of last season. Keep Kai Havertz, add to the squad properly, make yourself as strong as possible. And I think that for me, that's the lesson anyway. I think Havertz was good, got the injury. He's a guy who works really hard, puts in the effort. We all saw in that Wolves game when he was just spent that this is a guy who needs help. Maybe that's the point where you think, actually, can we do anything with Mikel Merino up front rather than wait for the disaster to happen? whether it's unfortunate or bad luck, when you see a player it's very, very rare, isn't it, to see a Premier League player as exhausted as he was that day against Wolves. And that should
Wolves, and then after that played the 90 minutes at Newcastle. Right?
Exactly. There should have been alarm bells ringing at that point, and they weren't. So I don't blame Havertz for that. Leandro Trossard is next up. He's a player who in 56 appearances got 10 goals and 10 assists for Arsenal. It's a 20-goal contribution season. I've given him a 7 because I think that's kind of a little above where I thought he was going to be, but at the same time, he's a player for me who was blown a bit hot and cold this season, particularly when he's played on the left. I like him. He's smart. He's technical. He can do things with the ball. He can produce finishes that maybe other players in this squad can't. But there's always something leaving me wanting a bit more from Leandro Trossard. Some of the decisions that he makes where he backs himself in areas perhaps that he shouldn't. I think he's been decent, but 7 out of 10 feels about right for me.
Yeah, I've gone 6.5.
Right.
You're not wrong. I think the 20 or 10 goals, 10 assists is not bad numbers, not numbers to be taken for granted. But I don't know. Maybe it's harsh. I think I see Leandro Trossard and I see a player that if Arsenal had a better version of that same player, it could make a massive difference. Just a player who's very similar but a bit better could make a huge difference to the team. I think was he ever present in the Premier League this season? Obviously not
33. 33 appearances. Oh, no, hang on. Right, okay. No, you're right. 38 appearances in the Premier League, yeah.
Yeah, which is some going in itself. But
28 starts and 10 substitute appearances.
A player that can always chip in, but I don't see it as more than that. And I feel like we've reached a point where we maybe need more than chipping in from forwards. And especially, I guess, 8 league goals, which is less than last season, but in a lot more minutes, I think, which is on its own, like, you get it. But this was a season where we needed more. When you lose Ødegaard, you lose Saka, you lose Havertz. Trossard scored 12 goals last season in the league. He scored 8 this season. He played 900 more minutes, so 10 extra full games, and scored 4 goals fewer. And we really could have done with those 4 goals when different players were missing. So I think that's the only thing for me. And it isn't fair, right? Because he played and then Martinelli was out, and that was why Mourinho had to go up front, because Martinelli was out as well. We couldn't even play Trossard down the middle and Martinelli on the left. He was playing, at times in a front three with Mourinho and Sterling or Mourinho and Nwaneri. But I think in those moments, that's when you really need the experienced player, the senior player who is used to playing in that front three to step up and offer a little bit more. And I think maybe Leandro Trossard kept offering the same amount instead of stepping up his game when that was what we really, really needed. Sure.
Okay, fair enough. I think that's a good assessment, actually. Maybe I've been a bit generous, but I
know, I'm sure you 20 goals, assists. I'm sure there'll be people who think I've been really harsh as well.
Yeah, but that's the nature of this whole conversation. So let me ask you then about Gabriel Martinelli and the season that he's had. How do you rate that?
I'm really torn. I thought Gabriel Martinelli was a big letdown, and again a player who didn't offer us anywhere near what we needed at the start of the season. And I think over the last couple of months after his injury, I think Gabriel Martinelli's been almost back to his best, to be honest. I think the goals and assists haven't quite been there, but sometimes that's to do with the finishing of other players and not necessarily his fault. I watched the last couple of months of the season really excited for Gabriel Martinelli next season. But you can't just sort of wash away the first, 5, 6, 7 months of this season. And he was disappointing. So I've gone with 6.
Yeah, I also went with 6 because I think it's hard to separate the expectations from a couple of years ago with the expectations going into this season, where, you know, he had such a good season, 15 league goals, and you're thinking, okay, you know, go again. And then it's not uncommon for a young player to find it difficult to replicate that. So I was looking at this season as a marker of whether or not he could do that. In the end, he ends up with 10 goals and 6 assists from 51 appearances. But I always feel like he has not really developed in the way that we would have liked him to when he first broke onto the scene. He is still pretty young, it's worth remembering. He's 23. Well, he'll be 24 in June, so he is still pretty young. And there is room and there is time maybe for him to develop, but there are just elements of his game where I feel like I'm not seeing it, you know. I'm not seeing the awareness of other players around him. I'm not seeing his ability to get his head up at times and see what's going on and producing what needs to be produced in that moment. He's basically our only player with real pace.
Yep.
And that's an issue I think that this team needs to perhaps address in the summer as well. And I'm not saying that's the only reason we should stick with him or we have stuck with him, but I feel slightly underwhelmed by what we've got from Gabriel Martinelli this season. The output has not been as good as you would like. There have been some really good moments and some nice things, but generally speaking, I couldn't go higher than a 6. Which brings us to, we've 2 more players left. Raheem Sterling. I feel almost like I can't give this guy a rating at all. But based on what I expected from Raheem Sterling and based on what we got, I am going with like a 1. And I kind of feel
because
bad.
You expected.
Well, I expected
Ballon d'Or football.
I didn't expect that, but I expected a player of his experience to be able to come into this Arsenal team. And I'm not saying I expected him to score 20 goals or anything ludicrous like that, but I didn't expect to see a player who could not do it at this level anymore. And I have to say, he's a guy who played for Liverpool. He's a guy who played for Man City. He's a guy who played for Chelsea. So he's not necessarily somebody that you're fondly predisposed towards, right? Because of the rivalries and the things he's done for those teams, sometimes against us, right? But I found it sad. I actually found it sad to watch him. It was more sad that we didn't do anything about it in the January transfer window. I get that. But he was so far below what I expected, I can't give him any more than 1.
No, I get it. Yeah. I think Raheem Sterling's an interesting case for the argument that footballers, it's not so much necessarily about their age, but how many years they have at the top. Because he's only 30, but he's been playing Premier League football since he was 17. And he looks like he's been playing Premier League football for that amount of time. It looks like he's spent 13 years of this grind, the grueling pre-seasons, the massive left-backs that try and kick the shit out of you. And he looks like someone that like time has just sort of taken its toll. And it was disappointing. It was a really disappointing season. I'd go with 2.
Okay.
But yeah, I'd hoped for... I guess an impact player, somebody who could, you know, if Saka had to miss a game, he could come in and, you know, not a big game necessarily, but the bottom 5 or 6 or 7 teams at home, maybe you can leave Saka on the bench just in case you need him, but have his feet up for 70 minutes and Sterling will do enough to create a goal or help out, and the cup games as well, and yeah, he just doesn't look anything like the player that he once was. I think physically the burst has just gone completely from his game. Not a single goal all season. It was, a really, really disappointing season. And I think when we got to the point of the season when we needed goals and Mikel Arteta was looking to the bench and putting Kieran Tierney on the wing. When you talk about feeling sad, I did just feel bad for Raheem Sterling in those moments. Not because I thought he should be on the pitch or he deserved more, but at times it's hard to watch. It's hard to watch a footballer go through that. And I don't know where he'll be next season, but I hope he has a much nicer time than he's had here.
Yeah, I think that for me, the writing was on the wall at the Bournemouth game when William Saliba got sent off and Sterling started that day on the right. And he was the guy who made way for Jakub Kiwior when Saliba was sent off. And I think that told us that the manager didn't trust his physical abilities. Not necessarily his technical abilities or his ability to do something. I think over the course of the season, we saw the way Mikel Arteta used him or didn't use him. He didn't believe that Raheem Sterling could get him a goal or an assist. But the fact that he so quickly recognised that there was a physical deficiency by taking Sterling off that day when he had other ways of reconfiguring his team after that red card, then that was when the alarm bell started ringing for me. So let's see what happens with him. Final player of the season that we're going to rate, and you get to go first, is Ethan Nwaneri. So let's do it.
Yeah, see, I had 8 written down for Ethan Nwaneri, and then I gave Miles Lewis-Skelly 10, and I'm like, can I then only give Nwaneri an 8? So I'm going to give him a 9. I think we go back to that, expectation, I guess. And I hoped Nwaneri would be able to have an impact this season, but I didn't know what that impact might look like. Mm-hmm. And I don't think the performances have been 9 compared to what I came into the season hoping for, but the end product. I think I maybe expected a few tidier performances, but not as many goals. Mm-hmm. And what we've got is actually performances where he's kind of not quite been there for 20, 30 minutes at a time. I think it's probably why we didn't see him so much towards the end of the season, even when we did need goals, is yes, he's there and he can provide moments, but can you rely on him and lean on him for 20, 30 minutes coming off the bench? Maybe not yet, but the boy can hit a ball and he knows where the top corner is, and I think that's been really, really exciting for a team that doesn't have enough of that in it. And I'm looking forward to seeing what comes next. I'm interested to see what comes next, because I think he's been better and more impactful playing out wide than he has centrally. But until now, it's been he'll become a player that plays centrally. And I'm looking at him, and things can change. He's so young, can change very quickly. But right now, I'm looking at a player thinking, if I want an impact, I'm probably putting him out wide instead of in the middle of the pitch. And obviously you've got Bukayo Saka out there to compete with. And that'll be interesting, I think, where his minutes come next season, where Mikel Arteta sees him having an impact for this team. And that'll be the next step, is maybe to really carve out what that role is looking forward. Yeah.
I went with 7.5, 7.5, because I think going into the season, we talk about expectations. He was the one that you were looking at going, can he make the breakthrough? Can he be the guy to add something to this team? And it took a while. There was a lot of call, wasn't there, when Odegaard got injured? Why aren't you playing Nwaneri in that position? And we had those discussions throughout the season about the role that Odegaard carries out in terms of leading the press. It's a lot to put on what would have been a then 17-year-old player. But then when he got to come in for Saka and we got to see the goal-scoring ability, that was a real step forward. And then I just feel like in the last third of the season, it's passed him by for reasons I don't necessarily understand 100%. I think he could have featured more in the last part of the season. I think what we saw throughout the campaign from him were moments of real quality that make you so excited about what he can do and what he can bring to this team going forward in the future. He's still only 18. He's only just turned 18 this year. I think there's a lot to be excited about, a lot of potential. But I also think we saw that there's still quite a bit of learning to do. Like if we talk about Miles Lewis-Skelly, let's say, and the things that he can learn from this season about, using his body and when to move or when to maybe knock the ball off rather than try and get away from an opponent. I think we've seen similar for Ethan in that there are times where you need to be a bit more secure in possession, but there's also times where maybe you need to take a chance going forward. And I think perhaps the fact that he is so young, I'm not saying it inhibited him, but there were times where I feel like, is he being asked to play safe here? And is that his natural game? And does he then learn when to go, when not to go, when to be secure in possession, but when maybe to try and take a player on? And I feel finding that balance. I feel maybe I'm being harsh on him now if I'm giving that mitigation to Lewis Skelly.
I think it's.
I think he blew more hot and cold than
Lewis Skelly. Yeah, Lewis Skelly has looked like he belongs, and Ethan, or not just that he looks like he belongs. He looks like he knows he belongs there, and I think I'd say that Ethan Nwaneri maybe doesn't trust himself that much yet,
for understandable reasons. Because
which is like, it's obviously it's not a criticism, but that's how I'd sort of define the difference between the two of them and watching them play. Is Miles Lewis Skelly, there is no doubt that he fully believes he should be playing every single minute for Arsenal, and that is where he's worked to be and where he deserves to be, and that he can help Arsenal win football matches. And I think Ethan Nwaneri has shown the talent to do those things. And I think it might be a personality thing a little bit as well. Lewis Skelly a bit more brash and outgoing, and maybe Nwaneri a little bit quieter. But I think it's kind of shrugging that off when you step over that white line, and knowing that you belong where you are is something that can take a player to another level. Yeah, absolutely. I think it has been a very positive season for him, all things considered. Almost got into double figures for goals in his first senior season for Arsenal, which is, really, really impressive. But, there were games where he was good, games where, I'm not saying he was bad, but where he found it a struggle to make an impact. And that's probably more true for forward players than it is for anybody else. But I think generally speaking, a positive season for him. So I think a fair rating, 7.5. I think you've given him 8. So people will have their own opinions, I'm sure, on Ethan Nwaneri and also the rest of the ratings that we've gone through. I will give you some details, you guys listening, on how you can actually rate the players and see where we end up. Could be quite interesting. For now, though, Lewis, we better leave it there. Thank you for taking the time, all of that time, to go through the entire squad to give your ratings. We'll let you go and we will catch up soon. Thanks a million. Cheers, Andrew.
Thank you very much indeed to Lewis. You can find him on Blue Sky. He is at lgambrose.bsky.social. That is at lgambrose.bsky.social. It took a bit longer than I thought, so you've got a real value for money episode today. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you enjoyed the ratings, whether you agreed or disagreed, whether you're now thinking, how could he? That 0.5 he gave that player or didn't give that player. I've lost all respect. But anyway, please do feel free to leave your own ratings on the post, as we said, over on Arseblog News. For now, I'm going to leave it there. There is a Champions League final this weekend, I guess, which is the most interesting aspect of what remains of this football calendar, this football season. I don't think there was any football midweek. Much like last week, no European football at all. But I will have a look at the final on Saturday, PSG versus Inter. Call me a small man, a petty man, if you like. But I am 100% behind Inter for this one. So let's see what happens. We can talk about it a bit on the Arsecast Extra on Monday. You can join myself and James for that. For now, though, have a great weekend, folks. Thanks for listening, as always, and we will catch you on the next one. Welcome back to Holy God FM, and that was the great Nitrogen Snot and their brand new single entitled Rio Ferdinand is a Bellend. As always here on Holy God FM, we welcome your correspondence, and we have a letter this week from a young lady. Her name is Katie, and this is what she says. Dear Holy God FM, but you see, but the problem is, and I thought that if anybody could help, it would be a massive gee-bag like you. Yours sincerely, Katie. Well, Katie, there is only one piece of advice I can realistically give to you, and it is not linguistic. Clearly you have a very passionate way with words. I would simply, if I were you, point to the 2 stars on the sleeve of my jersey and compare it to the no stars that any of the rest of them have. Then tell them to go fuck themselves, the absolute cunts. This is Holy God FM. We're going to take a short break here, but when we return, the big debate. Was Noah the greatest yachtsman of all time?